The salt spray tasted like a ghost on Dr. Elias Thorne's lips. It was a phantom of a memory, a flavor he associated with childhood dread and the imposing silhouette of Blackwood Asylum against a perpetually bruised Maine sky. The charter boat's engine grumbled, a low thrum that vibrated through the steel deck and up into his bones, a poor competitor to the frantic hammering of his own heart. Elias was a man built of controlled variables. As a combat surgeon in the dust-choked fields of Afghanistan, he had learned to compartmentalize chaos, to see a screaming soldier not as a dying boy, but as a collection of failing systems to be triaged and repaired. Now, as a renowned trauma specialist in Boston, he applied that same detached logic to the shattered minds of his patients. He dealt in synaptic firings and chemical imbalances, in tangible, treatable wounds. He did not deal in ghosts. Yet, here he was, churning through slate-gray water toward an island of them. The satellite phone felt unnaturally heavy in his jacket pocket. The message had arrived 2 days ago, a garbled burst of data from his sister, Aris. First, the image. A photograph taken in near total darkness, the flash illuminating a long, narrow corridor of peeling paint and skeletal bed frames. Scrawled across the far wall in what looked disturbingly like dried blood were 5 words. Asterisk. He's still making his rounds, asterisk. Then came the audio file. A mere 3 seconds of corrupted static, and beneath it, a sound that had frozen the blood in his veins, a woman humming an old, off-key lullaby. Asterisk. Their mother's lullaby. Asterisk. Aris, his brilliant, reckless, estranged younger sister. While Elias had run from their shared trauma, burying it under a mountain of medical textbooks and battlefield grit, Aris had charged directly into it. A psychiatrist herself, she had become obsessed with their mother's story. The misdiagnosis, the unjust commitment, the accidental overdose at Blackwood that the state had so neatly swept under the rug. She'd assembled a small research team, a historian, a paranormal investigator, and used a legal loophole to gain access to the condemned island. She was going to expose Blackwood for the charnel house it was. Now, she was gone. Almost there, Doc. The boat captain, a grizzled man named Silas, grunted from the wheelhouse. He gestured with a thumb toward the horizon. Don't see what anyone want with that godforsaken rock. Place is poison. Gives folks the whispering malady, they say. Elias squinted. The island clawed its way out of the mist, a jagged spine of dark rock and skeletal trees. Perched atop its highest point was the asylum itself, a Victorian monstrosity of Gothic spires and boarded-up windows, looking like a rotten tooth in the jawbone of the world. The whispering malady? Elias asked, his voice flat. Aye. Stay too long. The island's sorrow seeps into you. You start hearing things. Voices on the wind. Things that ain't there. Drives a man mad. Silas spat a stream of tobacco juice into the churning waves. Place was built on pain. That kind of thing leaves a stain. Elias offered a non-committal grunt. He didn't believe in stains. He believed in atmospheric pressure changes affecting the inner ear, in infrasound generated by wind moving through derelict structures, in the power of suggestion working on a mind already primed for fear. He was a man of science. He was here to find his sister, not to chase phantoms. The boat bumped against a rotting pier. Silas wouldn't set foot on it. I'll anchor offshore. Fire a flare when you want out. If you ain't back by dawn tomorrow, I'm calling the Coast Guard and telling them you were a damn fool. Fair enough, Elias said, shouldering his heavy tactical pack. It contained medical supplies, climbing gear, a high-powered flashlight, and a 9mm pistol he hadn't fired since his last tour. The moment his boots hit the damp wood of the pier, the air changed. It grew heavy, thick with the smell of wet decay, salt, and something else, a faint, cloying odor of antiseptic and old misery. The wind picked up, weaving through the asylum's broken windows with a low, mournful moan. Elias gritted his teeth, dismissing the captain's folklore. It was just the wind. He found the main entrance, a set of massive oak doors chained and padlocked. A heavy-duty bolt cutter from his pack made short work of the rusted links. The doors groaned open on protesting hinges, revealing a maw of absolute darkness. Flicking on his flashlight, Elias stepped inside. The beam cut a sharp, white cone through the black, illuminating a grand foyer that had long since surrendered to ruin. A marble floor was shattered, coated in a thick layer of dust and filth. A grand staircase swept upwards into shadows, its banister rotted away. The air was frigid, stagnant, and it was utterly, unnervingly silent. The moaning wind was gone, muffled by the thick stone walls. Here, the only sound was the crunch of his boots on fallen plaster and his own measured breathing. He followed the signs of Aris's team. Discarded protein bar wrappers, scuff marks on the floor, the faint impression of their equipment cases in the dust. They led him down a long corridor, the one from the photograph. Patient rooms lined either side, their doors hanging open like gaping mouths. Inside, iron bed frames rusted into skeletal claws. He saw the writing, just as it was in the picture. Asterisk. He's still making his rounds, asterisk. Up close, he could see it wasn't blood. It was rust, flaked from a leaking pipe overhead, smeared into words. A rational explanation. He felt a sliver of relief, which was immediately obliterated by a sound from the end of the hall. A faint, dragging scrape. Metal on stone. Elias flattened himself against the wall, pistol drawn, flashlight beam extinguished. His senses, honed by ambush alleyways and IED-laced roads, screamed to life. He listened, slowing his breath. The scraping grew louder, closer. It was accompanied by a wet, shuffling sound. It rounded the corner into the faint moonlight, filtering through a grimy window. It was a man, or what was left of one. He wore the tattered remains of a patient's uniform, his feet bare and bloody. His face was a mask of vacant horror, his eyes wide and unfocused. He was dragging a rusted bedpan by a chain, the source of the scraping. He shuffled past Elias's hiding spot, oblivious, his lips moving without sound. A ghost, a hallucination. Asterisk auditory and visual pareidolia. Asterisk Elias diagnosed himself, his mind scrambling for a scientific foothold. Asterisk stress-induced, sleep deprivation. The whispering malady is a textbook case of mass psychogenic illness. Asterisk. The spectral patient shuffled on, disappearing into the gloom. Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He had to find Aris. Fast. He found her team's makeshift base camp in what was once the asylum's main infirmary. Laptops and scientific equipment lay scattered across old operating tables, covered in a fine layer of fresh dust. A pot of coffee was half full, stone cold. They had left in a hurry. A map of the asylum was pinned to a corkboard, key areas circled by Aris in red ink. The surgical theater, the hydrotherapy ward, the sublevel. A low moan from behind a row of privacy screens sent Elias spinning, pistol raised. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a shuddering whimper. He moved cautiously, rounding the screen. Huddled on the floor, wrapped in a thermal blanket, was a young man in his early 20s. He was pale, trembling, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have hollowed him out. "It's okay," Elias said, lowering his weapon, his voice shifting into the calm, authoritative tone of a doctor. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Dr. Elias Thorne. I'm looking for my sister. Dr. Aris Thorne. The young man flinched at the name. Aris, he whispered, his voice cracking. They took her. The orderlies. They took everyone. The orderlies? Elias knelt, checking the man for injuries. No visible trauma. Severe psychological shock. There's no one here but us. No, the man insisted, shaking his head violently. You don't understand. They still walk the halls. They wear the white coats. They drag you to the treatment rooms. I saw them. I saw them take her. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. My name is Finn. I was the historian for the team. Elias offered him a canteen. Finn, listen to me. What you saw wasn't real. This place, it gets to you. It was real, Finn sobbed. He was leading them. The doctor. He never stops his rounds. Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his gut. Where did they take her? Finn looked up, a flicker of something desperation, maybe in his eyes. He pointed a trembling finger at the map on the corkboard, at a circle Aris had labeled hydrotherapy. Downstairs. Deep downstairs. It's where they did the worst things. Aris said. She said it was the heart of this place. I can show you. She made me memorize the layouts. The old ones. The ones not on the official blueprints. Elias hesitated for only a second. He was a man of science, but this boy was his only lead, and he was terrified. Terror was a clinical symptom Elias understood. Okay, Finn. Stay behind me. We're going to get her back. The descent into Blackwood's belly was a journey into a colder, darker circle of hell. Finn, though still trembling, proved to be an invaluable guide, leading Elias through a labyrinth of service tunnels and forgotten stairwells, bypassing collapsed floors and impassable corridors. The air grew thick with the smell of mold and something metallic, like old blood. The whispers started again. Not just the wind now, but distinct, fragmented sentences that seemed to slither into the edges of his hearing. Asterisk. Failure to comply with treatment. Asterisk. Asterisk. Subject exhibits extreme paranoia. Asterisk asterisk. Needs correction. Asterisk. You hear that? Elias asked, his voice low. Finn just nodded, his face ashen. They're always talking, diagnosing you. Elias pushed the thought away. Asterisk auditory hallucination. Asterisk. But it was becoming harder to maintain his clinical detachment. The asylum was no longer a passive collection of brick and mortar. It felt active, asterisk observant asterisk. He felt a pressure in his skull, a weight of immense sorrow and rage that seemed to radiate from the very walls. The bedlam, he thought, recalling one of Aris's research notes he'd skimmed. Asterisk A, theoretical genius loci. A composite psychic entity born from decades of concentrated human misery. The asylum itself, conscious and malevolent. Asterisk, he had dismissed it as romantic nonsense. Now, he wasn't so sure. As they passed the entrance to the main surgical ward, the doors chained shut, but with a small gap between them, Elias's flashlight beam caught a flicker of movement inside. He paused, peering through the crack. The theater was a tiered amphitheater of suffering. In the center, under a massive, rust-caked operating lamp, was a grotesque pile of things. He could make out the twisted frames of iron beds, the splintered wood of wheelchairs, the glint of scalpels and bone saws, all tangled with leather straps and the tattered fabric of straitjackets. And it was time's moving asterisk. The piles seemed to pulse, to writhe, coils of rusted metal shifting like the muscles of some abyssal creature. A low, guttural screech echoed from its core, a sound of grinding metal and 1,000 tortured voices screaming at once. The amalgam, Finn whispered, pulling him away. Aris called it that. The physical form of the building's anger. We have to go. Now. Before Elias could process the sheer impossibility of what he'd just seen, the sharp crack of a gunshot echoed from the floor above, followed by the distinctive, disciplined chatter of suppressed submachine guns. "Get down!" Elias yelled, shoving Finn behind a pillar as plaster and stone chips rained from the ceiling. Footsteps, heavy and tactical, thudded above them. Shouted commands, professional and cold. This was not the work of ghosts. "Who is that?" Finn stammered. "I don't know," Elias replied, his mind racing. "But they're not here to explore." He risked a glance up the stairwell. He saw them for a second. 3 figures clad in black tactical gear, sweeping the upper floor with brutal efficiency. On their shoulders was a logo he didn't recognize, a stylized serpent coiled around a chemical beaker. Corporate mercenaries. This changed everything. Aris hadn't just stumbled upon a ghost story. She'd walked into a conspiracy. "We need to move," Elias said, his voice hard. "They'll sweep their way down here eventually." "Finn, which way?" Finn, seemingly galvanized by the new tangible threat, pointed down a dark, narrow utility corridor. "This way. It connects to the old boiler room. From there, we can get to the hydrotherapy ward." They ran. The sounds of the mercenaries faded behind them, replaced by the thumping of their own footsteps and the ever-present whispers that now seemed to be laced with a cruel, mocking amusement. The asylum itself seemed to fight them. Doors slammed shut in their faces. Pipes burst, spraying them with foul, rust-colored water. In one horrifying moment, Elias was gripped by a vivid, waking nightmare. The corridor dissolved, and he was back in Kandahar, the air thick with smoke and the smell of copper. A young Marine lay on a stretcher before him, his abdomen shredded, his eyes pleading. Asterisk. "Don't let me die, Doc." Asterisk. The memory was so real, so absolute, that Elias froze, his hands reaching for surgical tools that weren't there. "Elias." Finn's voice cut through the fog. "It's not real. It's the building. It's showing you what hurts." Elias blinked, and the battlefield was gone. The dusty corridor of Blackwood snapped back into focus. He staggered, the psychic assault leaving him breathless and disoriented. The Bedlam had seen his deepest professional failure, the one patient he could never save, and had wielded it like a scalpel against his mind. "I'm okay," he lied, pushing forward. He was a doctor. He had to save the patient, and right now, the only patient that mattered was Aris. The hydrotherapy ward was at the lowest level of the asylum, a vast, cavernous chamber that stank of mildew and ozone. A thin layer of stagnant water covered the tiled floor, reflecting the beam of Elias's flashlight in oily rainbows. The walls were lined with rows of enormous claw-footed bathtubs and strange cage-like contraptions rigged with high-pressure hoses. This was a place of profound cruelty, where patients were subjected to torturous water treatments. And in the center of the chamber, his sister, Aris, was strapped to a tilted metal gurney, unconscious, an IV line snaking into her arm. Surrounding her were half a dozen figures in dark, hooded robes. And standing beside her, no longer the terrified, trembling boy, was Finn. He held an ancient, leather-bound book in his hands, his face illuminated from below by a circle of candles. He looked at Elias, not with fear, but with an expression of ecstatic, triumphant piety. "I'm so glad you could make it, Doctor," Finn said, his voice smooth and confident. "Your arrival completes the circuit." "Finn? What is this?" Elias's voice was dangerously low, his pistol leveled at the historian's chest. "This is a homecoming," Finn declared, his eyes shining with fervor. "My full name is Finian Blackwood. Doctor. Marcus Blackwood, the brilliant founder of this institution, was my great-great-grandfather. We, his descendants, are here to honor his work, to bring him back." The robed figures began to chant. a low, guttural drone that made the water on the floor tremble. "Your sister," Finn continued, gesturing to Aris, "has the bloodline, the direct psychic link to this place through your mother. But we needed a catalyst. A powerful, wounded mind, steeped in trauma and loss, to pry open the door for the Master. Your mind, Dr. Thorne, your pain is the key. The betrayal was a physical blow. The catatonic survivor, the terrified guide, it had all been an act. A performance to lure him into the heart of the machine. Before Elias could fire, a section of the far wall exploded inward. Kalen's mercenaries swarmed into the room, deploying with cold, hard precision. At their lead was a man in a crisp, black suit, his face a mask of grim determination. He held a tablet in his hand, a scanner on it beeping erratically. "Forget the girl," the man Kalen barked at his men. "The lab is behind that wall. Secure the data, sanitize the site." The room erupted into chaos. The cultists produced antique-looking daggers, charging the mercenaries with religious fury. Gunfire echoed off the tiled walls, flashes of light strobing across a tableau of violence and madness. But the cacophony of the firefight was nothing compared to the sound that rose from the chamber's darkest corner. It was the screech of 1,000 scraping nails, of grinding bone, of every scream ever uttered within these walls. The psychic energy unleashed by the violence and the ritual was a feast. From a heap of discarded medical refuse, the amalgam began to rise. Rusted iron beds twisted into legs, wheelchairs fused into a grotesque torso. A cage of surgical steel and leather restraints formed ahead, and from its depths, a single baleful red light began to glow the ghost of Marcus Blackwood, finally given form. The monstrous construct, 10 feet tall, shambled forward, its appendages of scalpels and bone saws clicking and whirring. It ignored the factions, the guns, the knives. It saw only patients. New patients, all in desperate need of treatment. It swiped a massive arm, and a mercenary was thrown across the room like a rag doll, his armor screeching against the tile. It snatched a cultist, the man's chants turning into a piercing scream as he was pulled into the creature's grinding metallic core. This was a three-way war, and Elias was caught in the middle. His objective hadn't changed. He needed to get to Aris. He sprinted, dodging gunfire and the lashing limbs of the psychic horror. He reached the gurney and began frantically working on Aris's restraints. Her eyes fluttered open. "Elias?" she murmured, disoriented. "I'm getting you out of here," he grunted, sawing through a leather strap with his combat knife. Behind him, Kalen had reached a reinforced steel door half hidden behind a section of false wall. The corporate lab. He swiped a keycard, and the door hissed open. "I have the asset!" he yelled into his radio. "All units, full sanitization protocol!" Elias freed Aris, pulling her to her feet just as the amalgam turned its attention toward them. Its metallic head tilted, and a voice, dry and ancient and utterly without pity, echoed in his mind. Asterisk. Patient profile. Dr. Elias Thorne. Diagnosis. Acute savior complex, complicated by unresolved familial trauma. Prescription. Surgical intervention. Asterisk. A multi-jointed arm ending in a whirring bone saw shot out towards him. Elias shoved Aris aside and dove, the saw chewing a line of deep gouges in the floor where he'd been standing. He couldn't fight it. It was an idea, a force of nature given a body of junk. You can't shoot a ghost. You can't kill a building. Asterisk. But you can treat a sickness. Asterisk. His eyes fell on the open door to the corporate lab. Kalen was inside, frantically downloading files from a terminal. Elias shoved Aris towards the relative safety of the lab's entrance. "Get in there! Find that research!" He fired 2 rounds at the amalgam, not to hurt it, but to draw its attention. The bullets sparked, harmlessly off its iron hide. It turned its full, horrifying focus on him. Aris, her mind clearing, scrambled into the lab. "Elias, "What are you doing?" "Running a new diagnostic," he yelled back, dodging another attack. Inside the lab, amidst the sterile equipment, was Kalen's objective: data on an experimental psychoactive drug, codenamed Nemesine. Aris's eyes scanned the screen. My God, it doesn't just trigger memory. It makes the brain's neural pathways hyper-receptive to external stimuli, especially electrical energy. Her words hit Elias like a lightning bolt. He looked around the hydrotherapy ward, at the water covering the floor, at the massive copper pipes running along the ceiling, at the thick electrical conduits snaking along the walls. Then his eyes locked onto a piece of antique equipment in the corner. A hulking metal cabinet with a dial and 2 large electrodes. An old electroshock therapy machine. A desperate, insane plan formed in his mind. He sprinted from the amalgam, diving behind a row of rusted tubs. He could see the asylum's main emergency generator through a grated doorway, a massive diesel beast. "Aris!" he yelled. "The main breaker for this ward. Can you get to it from the lab?" "I think so." "Why?" "When I tell you, I need you to kill the safeties and divert all power from the emergency generator to the ECT machine. All of it." He didn't wait for an answer. He broke from cover, firing at the amalgam to keep its attention, and scrambled towards the generator. Kalen, seeing his prize about to be compromised, emerged from the lab, pistol raised. "Whatever you're doing, stop!" Kalen shouted. A mercenary, pinned by a piece of falling debris, screamed as the amalgam's shadow fell over him. Kalen didn't even glance his way. Elias reached the generator and slammed the ignition button. With a roar, the ancient machine shuddered to life. The lights in the chamber flickered, then blazed with renewed, unstable intensity. He found the main power cable for the ECT machine, a python-thick bundle of insulated wire, and with a grunt of exertion, tore it from its housing. Sparks flew. He dragged the live, arcing cable back into the main chamber. The amalgam was lumbering toward him, its single red eye glowing with malevolent intent. Asterisk. Patient is resisting treatment. Sedation ineffective. Maximum intervention required. Asterisk. Aris. Now. Elias roared. He plunged the frayed end of the massive cable into the electrified water at his feet. Inside the lab, Aris found the digital breaker panel and rerouted the generator's full, colossal output. A tidal wave of pure electricity surged into the hydrotherapy ward. The result was apocalyptic. The water on the floor exploded in a blinding flash of blue-white light. The air crackled, and the smell of ozone was overpowering. Every metallic object in the room became a conductor. The amalgam, a being of metal and psychic energy, was caught in the center of a massive, building-wide shock treatment. It convulsed violently, every joint and plate seizing at once. The 1,000-voiced scream that erupted from it was not just of pain, but of psychic feedback. The hyper-receptive consciousness of the bedlam, amplified by the corporation's drug residue that had seeped into the very foundations, was being overloaded, cauterized, and erased. The spectral forms of patients and orderlies that flickered at the edges of the room blazed like magnesium flares and vanished. The red light in the amalgam's core, the spirit of Marcus Blackwood, shattered with a final echoing wail of disbelief. The monstrous construct flew apart, its components clattering to the floor in a dead, inert pile of junk. The cultists, their psychic anchor obliterated, collapsed to the ground, their minds wiped clean, leaving them as empty shells. In the ringing silence that followed, only Elias, Aris, and Kalen remained standing. Kalen, shielded inside the lab, looked stunned. He made one last desperate move for the hard drive containing the research. Elias picked up a long, rusted pipe once the arm of a monstrous ghost and swung it with all his remaining strength. The blow caught Kalen square in the side of the head, and the corporate enforcer went down in a heap. Smoke began to pour from the fried generator. The electrical surge had ignited the asylum's ancient, rotten core. Small fires blossomed, spreading with terrifying speed. "We have to go," Aris said, grabbing the hard drive. Elias nodded, grabbing his sister's hand. They fled, leaving the broken bodies and shattered minds behind. They navigated the burning, collapsing labyrinth not as victims, but as survivors. The whispers were gone. The oppressive, malevolent weight had lifted. The building was just a building, now a dying one. They burst out of the main doors and into the clean, cold air of the coming dawn. The sky to the east was brushed with the first pale strokes of gray and pink. Behind them, Blackwood Asylum was a funeral pyre, flames licking from its hollow eyes, consuming the rot from within. Elias looked at Aris, her face smudged with soot, her eyes filled with a new, hard-won clarity. The shadow that had stretched over their family for a generation was finally burning away. He raised the flare gun and fired a single red star into the morning sky. On the horizon, he saw the distant light of Silas's boat, turning back to bring them home.